Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, and nucleic acids like DNA. We're really diving into our biochemistry now. So these are important biological molecules. Okay, give me a second here. There we go. All right, just to refresh your memory of atoms, let's just practice this. You can click on just how small is an atom if you want to watch that video, but I'm just going to jump ahead. All you need to do is fill in the in the blanks here. So this is just review from last time. So remember the tiny little things on the outside, we say they don't have any kind of a mass and they're negatively charged. Those are the electrons. The balls on the inside that have a plus, the yellow ones, those are the protons. They have a mass of 1, and the neutrons have no charge and they have a mass of 1 also. So go ahead and get those labeled if you have not done so already. All right, let's talk about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are produced by plants during photosynthesis, and they include 3 elements only: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And if you say the word carbohydrate, it kind of helps you think of what letters or what elements are in it: carbon, hydrogen, and then oxygen also. So their function for us who eat them is quick energy. The carbohydrates are a source of quick energy for us. So they include things like sugars. Sucrose is the sugar that you guys use that's table sugar. Glucose, you may have heard of, as a sugar that plants make for themselves and that your mitochondria use. Lactose is a sugar that many people have trouble digesting. It's the sugar that's in milk. And even starch is a type of carbohydrate. All right, so now I want you to take a look at the pictures down below. You're going to need to be able to identify the shapes of these molecules, and it can be pretty intimidating at first. When we're in person learning, we build models. We have these little model building kits that are super fun to use. When you're learning online, we don't have those model kits, so it's a little bit more, you have to just be looking at the pictures. So what I want you to notice is the shape. It's kind of a hexagon. And so on the left, we see glucose, and it's one hexagon, and I'm going to call those rings. So it's got one ring that's a hexagon shape, whereas starch has a whole bunch of hexagons or a whole bunch of rings put together. So we're going to call glucose a monosaccharide, which means it has one sugar or one ring, and we're going to call starch a polysaccharide, which means it has 3 or more rings put together. So that's a whole bunch of them put together. I'm going to skip the model building because you guys don't have the model buildings if you're online. And if you're in person, you're in person. All right. So what are lipids? Lipids are fats and oils, including the fatty acids, which many of you have heard of. They have, ironically, twice as much energy per gram than carbs. So my students sometimes are like, well, KJ, why don't we eat lipids? Why are we eating carbs if they're so full of energy? Well, the issue is that it's too much energy. You guys don't need that much energy. So why don't we eat a stick of butter? Because it's really bad for us. It's too much energy. We gain lots of weight if we eat a stick of butter. All right, so the function of the lipids is long-term energy storage. It's how you store your food in case you don't have food later. So that's the purpose of fat, is to save us when we're not going to eat. Imagine a polar bear who eats only 6 months out of the year. The other 6 months they spend hibernating, and their bodies feed on the fat that they stored up during the first 6 months of the year. All right, so there's 2 different types of fatty acids, and you've probably heard of them: saturated fats and unsaturated fats. And I just need you to know the difference between the two. Saturated fats, I emphasize the S, have all single bonds between the carbons. Did I show you the picture of it in here? Nope, I didn't. Okay, so this is a picture, just wanted to show you. This is a picture of what a saturated fat looks like. Notice that's a long chain of carbons, and then it's surrounded by hydrogens. Now, please think back to the carbohydrates. They didn't look anything like this. The carbohydrates were those hexagons, right? They had like ring structures, and there was one ring or there was a bunch of rings. This is a long chain of carbons that has hydrogens all around it, but there's no ring shapes here. So the saturated fats, look at these lines. Each line represents a covalent bond, and it's a single bond. Each one is a single bond. If you see 2 lines, that's a double bond. So for the saturated fats, between the carbons, not between the carbon and oxygen, but between the carbons, it's all single bonds. Do you see it's all one line in between every single carbon? Saturated fats are unhealthy and they're usually solid at room temperature. So butter is an example of a saturated fat. So let me say those S's again. Saturated fats have single bonds and they are usually solid at room temperature, which means they're butter and unhealthy. Unsaturated fatty acids, on the other hand, have at least one double bond between the carbons. So look along here. I'm just looking between the carbons. Single bond, single bond, single, 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 single. Oh, a double bond. And notice what that does. It causes the molecule to have a little bit of a bend in it, and that makes it healthier. We're not going to go into why that makes it healthier, but that helps make it healthier. So these tend to be the liquids at room temperature. So usually we think of these as the plant fats, olive oil, corn oil, that kind of thing. And in general, we find that substituting unsaturated, so those are the liquids, for saturated instead of butter, reduces cholesterol levels. However, some of us have genetics that just make us super vulnerable to having high cholesterol levels. High cholesterol leads to lots of things, but high blood pressure, a risk of stroke, that kind of thing. And so people need to take medications for it. And some of us just don't have that. And so some people can get away with eating high saturated fat foods and they don't get the high cholesterol. And some people barely eat any and they do get the high cholesterol. So a lot of it has to do with genetics in addition to diet. All right. And if you were in person, we would have you build. Notice it looks a little crooked, but there's still not any rings. This is not a carbohydrate. And this is that long chain of carbons, carbon, carbon, carbon. And this is all single bonds between the carbons. The only double bond I see is between a carbon and an oxygen. So this is a saturated fat. All right, we're already to the last section. The last biological molecule we're going to talk about today are the nucleic acids. You probably are familiar with DNA, which stands for deoxyribose nucleic acid. Sorry, deoxyribo, you don't say the S in it, deoxyribonucleic acid. So that's what DNA is. So their function, the nucleic acids, they store our genetic information. It's kind of like a computer program, you guys, and it's freaky that we have that in all of our cells. So DNA determines our traits, and DNA makes up the chromosomes that we inherit from our biological parents. These are images of what DNA looks like. If you've taken our DNA unit, you already know what DNA looks like. This is the C and the G that are always across from each other, and this is the A, and the T, A and the T that are always across from each other. This over here is actually a molecule of RNA, which is another type of nucleic acid. You probably don't need to know that for this unit, but if you do the DNA unit, you do need to know about RNA. All right, last thing, and then we're done. Nucleic acids are made of building blocks that are called nucleotides. So DNA is a whole bunch of nucleotides put together. The molecule of DNA then twists up to form what's called a double helix. So right here, this image on the left, this is a nucleotide. It includes a phosphate group, a sugar that's called deoxyribose, and a nitrogen base. And the nitrogen bases, if you took the DNA unit, you know is A, T, C, and G, what I was just talking about on the other slide. You don't need to know that for this, but I'm just telling you that's what they are. So there are 3 billion of these nucleotides that join together to make our nucleic acids, to make our DNA. So it says, can you see the nucleotides in the diagram to the right? Look for a second and see, can you find the phosphate, can you find the sugar, and can you find the nitrogen base? So there's one of them. And then right below, I'll circle it again, there's another one right there. And then below it, there's another one right there. And then below it, there's another one right there. And then they're on the other side also. Here's that phosphate group and a sugar and a nitrogen base. So there's one. And down here, there's the phosphate, the sugar, and the nitrogen base. Here's the phosphate, the sugar, and the nitrogen base. So nucleic acids, they're made of these really repetitive molecules that are called nucleotides. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it. Let me know if you have any questions.